Okay, so let's continue now by trying to define exactly who you help and how you help them. So here we're talking about your beneficiaries, your service users, many different terms, but the people that your organisation was set up to help, and specifically when you're applying for funding, who this project or service will help. So they want to know who will benefit and how they'll benefit and in what way. So here you might want to refer to your target group. You may well have defined your target group when setting up your organisation. So you might want to refer to your target group by age or gender or location. You might also want to talk about presenting issues or a specific need that they have, such as homelessness, unemployment, disadvantaged children, single parents, ex-offenders. You want to touch on here as well how it will help them. But it's important to kind of give some context around why this is your target audience, so why you've chosen to work with this group of people, why they need your support, and you could say, for example, our organisation was set up specifically to work with homeless people in our town centre. You might also want to say, we will do this by providing meals and drop-in services. So you might just want to expand a little bit on why you've chosen that selection of people and how you intend to help them. And then it can be helpful to talk about how many people need this support. So you might know this in terms of your community. You might know how many people are likely to use your service. Or if you're nationwide, you're looking at UK statistics on, say, homelessness or military veterans or any descriptive terms for our beneficiaries. It can be helpful to have an idea of how many people could actually benefit from your service. This isn't the same as how many people you will help. In fact, what the funder will want to see is that the demand for this type of service outweighs the supply, because they don't want to be funding something that's already covered by other organisations. So the more that you can identify that need and the number of people who need that service, the more likely you are to be able to prove that evidence of need and that there is actually a genuine need for what you propose to deliver in the area that you want to deliver it. So again, there's some space in the workbook for you to make some notes on this, and I would recommend you spend a little bit of time really clearly defining who your target audience is, and also how you want to describe them, in what kind of way you want to describe them to the funder and evidence that need. Which brings me nicely to my favourite subject. I'm only being slightly sarcastic there. I do genuinely love talking about outputs, outcomes, and impact. There's a lot of confusion around these terms, so I've tried to really clearly define what outputs, outcomes, impact are, and how you can best describe them, how you can define them for yourself, and how you can apply it to what you do. Okay, so outputs, these are always numbers. These are the tangible results of your project that you can measure, and you can measure them quite easily. So this might be the number of activities or sessions that you run. It might be the number of people you support. It might be the number of people on a course or program. It can also be an improvement, so it could be a percentage. It could be, for example, an improvement in attendance at school as a result of what you've delivered, or it could be the percentage of participants who attended your course who've secured a job. So to confirm, it's always a number and it's always measurable, and it's always something that you can quite easily keep track of. So it's something that you're going to be recording anyway, like the number of people who turn up to an event. It's something that you can count as you go along delivering your project. Whereas outcomes are the difference made. Outcomes are generally how people feel. Outcomes are what people might write on an evaluation form or a feedback form. Do people feel more confident or happier or less anxious after attending your project? I'm not saying that these things can't be measured, because quite often they can. Quite often we can ask people these questions on a scale of 1 to 10, and we can use those as measurements. So outcomes can still be numbers as well. They can be percentages, they can be improvements by number. But the way that we talk about outcomes is the difference it's made to a person when you say to somebody, what difference has it made coming along to this session every week? And they say to you, I just feel like it's got me out of the house. I feel a lot less isolated. I feel like I've made some new friends. I feel a lot more confident, and I feel ready to move forward. Those are your outcomes. In the longer term, it's a good idea to get into the habit of measuring outcomes as well, even if, like say, that's on a scale of 1 to 5, and does that number increase as the program progresses? But they don't have to be measured by numbers. They can also be statements and quotes and feelings and less tangible things like that. And then impact. So what are the long-term effects of your project on the beneficiaries, on the community, even on your organisation? How will your project affect real change? Now, impact is often, but not always, often something that you can't measure in the moment. You can't always measure it at the time of delivery. In fact, I usually talk about impact as being more of a long-term measure. So I'll give you an example from when I worked for the Princess Trust. It was really drilled into me about outputs, outcomes and impact, and how we talked about them. So let's say we were delivering a project, and attending that project were 12 young people who were unemployed. The outputs of that project could be that 12 unemployed young people attended a 12-week program. It could also be 8 of those young people had a job interview within a month of that program finishing. It could also be 4 of those young people started volunteering for a local community organisation as a result of this project. It could also be that 80% of participants had 100% attendance. The outcomes might be something like 75% of participants said that they felt a lot more confident about applying for jobs. It could be 50% of participants felt more prepared for a job interview. It could be that 50% of participants now felt that they had the knowledge and skills needed for an entry-level job. We used to talk about impact by focusing on the contribution made to the bigger issue of unemployment amongst young people. So it might be that the impact of this program is that it contributed to reducing unemployment of 16 to 25-year-olds in West Yorkshire. These things are harder to kind of explain and give examples for even. But recently I was delivering this workshop for a number of local community organisations, and so we tried to come up with some examples for them. All of these organisations were very small and they supported a small number of people each, but collectively they were all supporting people who were isolated or who were, living alone, like older people living alone. So we might not individually make a massive contribution to loneliness in the UK, but collectively as a community of voluntary organisations, we are making a difference to how many people say they feel lonely every week, how many people actually have some connection with other people in their community every week. So those are the things that I would talk about. You might not be able to measure them. It's unlikely that you'll be able to prove them at the stage that you're writing the bid. But think a bit longer term. If you continue doing what you do for the long term, and if other organisations contributed to that same issue, what could be the long-term impact on social issues within the UK or even within your local area? And then finally, in this section, something that's often overlooked, I think, is project timescales. Now, knowing what your realistic project timescales are is crucial to not only the success of your applications, but also the successful delivery of your projects. Have a think about when your project will start or when you want your project to start. Remembering to give enough time to hear the outcome of any funding. Like we talked about in the last video, you might get the funding in 8 weeks, you might get it in 3 months, you might get it in 6 months. There are even some large national funds where you need to give it a whole year from your application of stage 1 to hearing the outcome of your application. So at this stage, just have a think about when your project will start. Also, when will it finish? Really helpful to know when your project will end. Most funders will want to fund a project with a start date and an end date, rather than just your service over a period of time. So learning how to package up what you do into a project with a start and an end date, even if it's your core service, is another important thing which we'll look at a little bit later. And also another question that they like to ask, which is kind of linked to this, is what will happen if the project doesn't take place? You know, what knock-on effect will that have for your beneficiaries, for your community? And quite often they also ask, what will happen if you don't get the funding? So always be thinking about your plans in terms of, would you delay the project if you didn't get the funding for it? Would you run it on a smaller scale? What would happen if it didn't take place? Again, you can come back to the need of your community. So if you weren't able to deliver this project, the knock-on effect to the people who would benefit from that would be that they wouldn't have access to this service. They wouldn't gain this advantage. They wouldn't have this support, whatever that is that's related to your project. Just have a think about it in relation to the timescales, and in the next video we'll start to look at costs and putting a budget together.